Hi, everybody. Welcome back to The Broken Brain. It's me, Dwight, your host once again. I'm always the host, so I don't know why I give that qualifier. I'm really lucky today and grateful to be joined by Tonya Lester, who is a licensed clinical social worker and also an expert when it comes to relationships and family and couple systems but probably a lot of other things. You know, that will emerge. All your other expertises will emerge as we talk. So,
great.
Welcome to The Broken Brain.
Thank you so much for having me, Dwight. I really appreciate it.
I was grateful to get your scheduler had touched bases about some things, and I was reading about some of the things that you do. And I think it's something I don't think we've hit on for quite a while as a specific episode talking about things with relationships and the way people relate to each other in a real direct sense. Well, at least, I mean, that comes up a lot, doesn't it? It's probably one of those things that's tangential to a lot of psychological issues and counseling needs. Do you find that too? You'd mention that.
Yeah. Our relationships, right, create the foundation of our life. So we can't really work on any issues without looking at it as part of the systems of our relationships.
Yeah. How did you start getting into this particular branch of counseling? Where do you come from? Who are you anyway?
Okay. So I was being a therapist was second career for me, and I was already married and had a baby when I went back to school. And so was really grappling a lot myself with relationships and kind of the cognitive load of being a new parent and working out different expectations from me. It's my husband and I. And then I actually started in trauma work, but while working with people with trauma, I really felt like the relationship piece came up again and again and again. And that was just my interest to look at how can we make better relationships? Relationships matter more than anything else. And so if we can somewhat solve or improve that piece, a lot of other issues fall into place from there. I think, the quality of our relationships is the quality of our life. So it always makes sense to start there.
Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting to me how a lot of different things interrelate. I find, just like you said, with trauma, right, there's a big push to be trauma informed in everything we do. I mean, addiction and compulsivity comes up a lot, those impulsive things like that. There's all of these things, and there's certain things that tie back to the bedrock of mental health. And one of them certainly is, how do we relate to others around us? With that background in systems, like when you're looking at systems theory and relationship theory, I've noticed it's interesting. You can even bring that in when there's, even if you're just talking to one person, right? In the way that you're counseling.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't just work with couples, but probably most of my sessions are couple sessions, but I see people individually as well for a lot of the same issues. Like, how am I communicating? What am I accepting? What do I want? Come up across the board. Mm-hmm.
Excellent. What did you do before, if you don't mind me asking?
I was an actor, actually.
Oh,
I was a not successful actor.
I was pulling up your IMDb. No.
Yeah. Please do not. Yeah.
Well, that's very interesting though, because maybe you found this as well. It's one of the reasons why I have a lot of creators and creative people on the show is I think there's a big connection between a lot of people who do therapy and counseling and a lot of other creative people, because I remember in graduate school, one of my professors said, it's an interesting job when the major means of intervention, no matter what tools or what systems you're using in the room, you are the tool of intervention, right? Mm-hmm. It's like if I'm doing EMDR, if I'm doing DBT, if I'm doing systems theory, all of that is like, yeah, that's important. But even in research, they find if you don't find a good bond with your therapist, doesn't matter what they do.
That's right.
It doesn't tend to help. So
that's right.
So having because being a therapist is a lot about being like a storyteller and being someone who, is working obviously with emotion, in ways similarities to being an actor. I find anyway, but
I think there's, as a performer or as an actor, but probably as a writer, writing music, it's you're trying to connect with the human condition, right? And really understand people. And that is still what motivates me now. It's really all I'm interested in is how people pick, and how they relate.
Very cool. Yeah. So, tell everybody a little bit about what are some of your ways that you approach when you're going to work with someone, and let's say particularly, a couple makes an appointment with you and they come in. What kinds of things are they in for? No, I should say, how do you approach it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, to touch on the Infor piece is I do tell couples right off the bat that couples therapy is much more uncomfortable in a lot of ways than individual therapy. I joke that individual therapy is a nice warm bath and a couples therapy is, a bucket of cold water. It's your partner is right there, right? Everything is out in the open. And so it can be more uncomfortable. And if people will come in saying, this is going to be hard, but it's going to be worth it. We're going to get through the other side with all these tools to make the relationship better. I want them to have that orientation that sometimes it's going to be very uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And how I think about it is that we're going to get all the information out and kind of set the table with what's going on. And so we think of it as like an overcrowded table and there's all these obstacles. And once everyone agrees that there's kind of a shared truth about what's happening and a shared experience, then we can try and chart together what might be a path through those obstacles to the other side, where hopefully there's kind of a shared vision of the relationship. And then the couple and me as a therapist, we have to basically agree on what the path is. And I have really found that if we can agree on what exists now and agree on the path and agree on the vision, therapy will go really well, even when people have been struggling a lot. But if we can't agree on those three things, or there's no kind of shared truth about what has been happening, then it's just a much, much steeper climb. And that's where we get stuck. So a lot of times people will come and say, there's addiction, there's been infidelity, we, have been lying about money. Is there any hope for us? And I think there is, as long as you both want to. And then there's other couples who will have issues that seem much less serious, but that they can't agree, on kind of what's happened or what they want or how to get there. And then maybe it won't work out, which also I will say, I don't think separating is, not working out. I think sometimes relationships are meant to end, right? And that hopefully we go forward healthier and having learned from them. But better to leave a destructive relationship, and that can be a successul outcome depending on what's happening.
Can be true sometimes, even if both people aren't trying. It doesn't always have to be someone being abusive necessarily for that to
absolutely
happen. I always like to prep people for that too, that it's their decisions what to do. And as a therapist, I feel like I'm there to support whatever my client's decision is. Now, if there's something clearly unhealthy, I might say, my opinion is that's unhealthy. But part of me, like if my therapist rejected me for doing something stupid or talking about something stupid, that wouldn't be a very good bond.
No,
I expect that they'd be like, well, I'm here for you, whatever you want to do. Yes, I'm biased in favor, not so much of the person, but of the person's health, right?
Right.
That's the way I always look at it. That and also having that person with that acceptance is important. And as you said, the next best thing to being in a happy, healthy marriage is not to be unhappy and unhealthy. It's, somewhere in there. But also, you bring up a really good point, which is people come with this feeling of, we can't really overcome this, right? Or I don't know if we can overcome this.
Yeah.
I find that deep down, people, when you really get down to it, a lot of times I think they believe they can, but they're not sure if it's okay to get through this or if they really can do the things it will require. Otherwise, they probably wouldn't come in. Somewhat. I mean, not always, but if they're both on the same page, that's huge that they come in together, I think.
It's huge that they come in together. I think it's very brave. I would say, I don't know, maybe you don't find this sometimes. So I think usually they're both hopeful, right? They're at least have a little ember of hope that things could be better. But then sometimes I also find that someone has been kind of dragged to therapy And maybe they're really there to end the relationship. I don't know if sometimes I have had a couple come in and I'll think, oh, I wish you'd come 2 years ago,
That's the thing. I mean, that is one thing that's very hard, I think, is the timing of it. I know that I've heard that from a lot of people who've been through a breakup or divorce, is that, it probably would have been different a year before, 2 years before, right away after we had this tragedy, instead of when we realized it was ripping us apart. There is a timing issue. So you bring up, I think, that idea that if it's crossed anyone's mind out there to say, maybe we should work on this, probably a good time to work on this then. If it's
absolutely public service announcement. Yeah. If anyone wants to go to couples therapy, just go to couples therapy. Don't put it off.
I'm going to share this with you. This is just my theory. And I have, I want to see what you think of it. You have more expertise in this area than I do, but I have formed this little theory where I feel like teamwork is probably even more important, even a little more important than maybe some of the romantic trappings that we usually think of in a relationship. I think if people feel that they're on the same team, wonderful things can happen. Whereas they might feel emotionally connected to someone, but if they just can't get on the same team, it's much less likely to be fulfilling or to work out.
100%. I sometimes tell this story. My mom was proposed to 3 or 4 times by different people before my dad. And as a teenager, that seemed like, she was, that was shocking that this many people wanted to marry her. And I remember I'm not surprised people wanted to marry my mother, but that she had been proposed to so many times.
Mom, you? No, I know what you mean though. It's like our parents don't seem like romantic beings to us.
No, right. Pursued, so ardently. So I remember asking her as a teenager, why did you say yes to dad after having rejected these other suitors? And she, I expected something romantic, right? That she had been swept away. And she said, and this is classic thing my mom would say, very pragmatic. She said, well, your dad just seemed like someone I could figure things out with. And that has stuck with me. I joke that the sexiest word 5 years into marriage is reliability. It is not some charisma or even sexual chemistry, which is also really important. But it's who can I count on? Who do I trust to try and navigate life together, knowing that life is really just one big problem solving exercise. So you want someone who you can trust and that that they feel empathy towards you and vice versa. Mm-hmm.
And do you often see the breakdown of that trust at some point leading to a place like your office or leading to problems, basically? Is that a common
sometimes route? Trust. Yeah. And I think, again, back to the idea of a shared experience, I think what happens is that two people sometimes feel like they've been involved in different marriages, right? Because one partner isn't feeling seen and respected and appreciated. And the other partner might think like, oh, all of those things are fine. Or they might sense some distance from their partner, but don't realize how far things have broken down. So I think being able to really see your relationship through your partner's eyes is a gift and important. And that's something I try and do with clients. Definitely.
Have you heard, I know I hear this kicked around a bit. I wonder what you think of it. I think it originates, maybe. Everybody can tweet at me. What's your Twitter handle? I'll have them tweet at you, actually. No, but I think Esther Perel was the first one I ever heard talking about this, but this idea of kind of a marriage 2.0, that it's good to, that everybody ought to have multiple marriages in life, but it's way better. It's way more convenient if you can have them with the same person.
Absolutely. Yeah. Less expensive, better for the children, less chaotic. Yeah. If they're all with the same person.
Yeah. And how would you break, like a lot of people hear that and they're like, what are you talking about? Just that thought of kind of re-engaging and reconnecting, I think is what people think. But I mean, how would you describe that of the people are working towards, I would say, not just regaining their old marriage, because the old dynamic is what got them to there in the first place, right? I mean, It's like it's an AA. There's an old AA saying that it's like our thinking got us here in the first place. We need some new thinking, right?
Right. Yeah.
How do you approach, or what are your feelings about the changes to a relationship, and what is it people are working towards?
Well, if we just even look at it individually, think of how much, you or I have changed. Like, I got married when I was 25. And so now I've been married 2 decades, and I'm different, right? I'm different. He's different. You become different people through time. And I think that the key thing is to make sure that the connection is strong, that you are seeing each other now, that you don't have a vision of who this person was stuck in the past, so that you're growing together. And to dedicate time. I think of it sometimes as like having a weekend away, or, taking a class together, or whatever it is. People talk about date night, but it's like, what blows out the cobwebs in the relationship? Like, cobwebs and dirt and grime, it means neglect, right? And am I seeing this person with fresh eyes and really attuned to who they are now, not who they were or have been? Am I allowing them to grow? Are they allowing me to grow? Are we growing together, is how I will put that.
Yeah.
And I think you can formalize it. I actually know a couple who every 5 years does real work, like meets, and they do a weekend retreat, and they really discuss like, what were our values, what has worked, what will be our values, say, now that our kids have moved out of the house, or whatever is happening. It's like, let's have a summit and let's figure out what's next for us. And I love that idea.
That's a great idea. Yeah. And that's very proactive as well.
That's right. It's proactive, and to really engage in it is such good faith. And, if your partner came to you and said, I booked this weekend away, this is what I want to talk about, you would feel like, oh, wow, this person is so committed to being with me. I think that anyone would really appreciate that effort.
Isn't it interesting how much we still view counseling as like the principal's office? It's like, oh, you need to go to counseling, or we need to go to counseling. And there's still, I'll say, and I've talked about this a lot on the program, that I was an adult and a counselor and a parent and a spouse and all of these things. I'd been working in the mental health field forever before I ever was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and I needed problems in my life in order to do that. and I work in it. If anybody, should I get on here on the show and talk about neurodiversity and talk about all these things and how, treatment's wonderful and everything. And it's like, there's a hesitation sometimes. I will say, once I got there, man, treatment's wonderful, as I knew deep down anyway. But so even in the field, there's like do I have a problem?
That's right.
And so that idea of preventative health care, right, which is what we're talking about, if people are doing some work on their relationship that they don't, I'm going to say, have to, right?
Yeah. It's the rock bottom analogy, right? It's like, you can quit drinking just because it seems like it would be a better idea, right? Nothing has to happen.
Right.
And you can decide to go to therapy because it seems like there are some things you can work on. I do think, even though there's nods towards being a little more real, I think that in our culture, we really put such a premium on someone having it all together and having figured it out. And then as clinicians, to present this sort of, well, I have it all figured out, and now I will bestow my wisdom on you. And of course, that's not how it is at all. I actually think we always have the problems we try and treat, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't even be interested in it, right? If you didn't grapple with it yourself.
I like that. And I like the way you said it, because a lot of people will say, well, therapists are the most screwed up people. And, what are we going to say to defend ourselves? But I like the way you said that, which is very positive.
Good, yeah.
And I had never had any real experiences with substance abuse or anything like that when I started working in an outpatient addictions program. And I was amazed how much I had in common with my clientele. When we'd sit there and we'd talk and we'd go around the room in the groups and things, I'd be like, yep, Yep. I get that.
Me too.
Yep. I get that.
Yeah.
I think that I've learned that that's not healthy, but I still have it in me. You have those different feelings that you key into, and I find that actually my own experience has been it's unquestionably made me better at the job of talking to people and seeing things from their perspective and helping them.
Sure.
That's just helped, right? And
Yeah.
to get away from even. Because I didn't feel like I was someone who felt like I knew better than anyone else necessarily, but to get away from that, even that concept being subconsciously in there and just saying like, yeah, I have as many issues as anybody who comes in, Hey, yo, Brainiacs. This is just a quick reminder that today's episode is sponsored by Three Rivers Training, Carol Miles' training program for EMDR. Boy, we just completed the first initial training for Section 1 of EMDR, and that was fantastic. This is one of the best trainings I've ever attended as an attendee, as well as having them sponsor the program. I will tell you the Section 2 is coming up very, very soon. You're going to receive some details about that. And even if you did not complete Section 1, but you've done other trainings, other Section 1 training, Phase 1, or if you are wanting to audit the class just to brush up on skills, then I definitely encourage you to go check it out and to sign up today and to see if it's right for you. EMDR, of course, is a wonderful technique to help people process trauma. And as I've gone through that training, I have been using those techniques with people and finding great results. Very, very interesting, very, very powerful. So go to carolmiles.com to learn more and to sign up for Phase 2 training. You definitely want to keep an eye on that as well, on that website, so that as new trainings come up, you can be part of them. Once again, Three Rivers Training, carolmiles.com to learn more.
I had been in therapy, but this is so arrogant and embarrassing, but didn't think it really worked for me, even though I was a therapist, right? I had this I was a little bit skeptical. And for myself, I felt like it worked for other people, but not for me. And then when I started working with my now therapist, and it has been transformative, I definitely became a much better therapist, right? If you've been on the receiving end and had a meaningful experience.
Such a big difference. It really is.
Yeah.
More than people think,
Yeah.
Yeah. And I would recommend, I think anybody who's going to do it should receive some of their own and have to go through some of that experience.
100%.
Even though I know, they used to dissuade it, I feel like, in graduate school, because they'd say, oh, you're going to self-diagnose yourself. Don't do that. And I fear that sometimes that even reinforced subconscious shame that we have with our own issues, even going through graduate school.
Sometimes. I didn't get that message, which I think is really self-diagnosing is part of learning, right? It's like we look at our own systems to make sense. It's in the same way that you said that whatever modality you choose will work if there's the connection, right? And I think it'll work. If it would work with your system, you will be probably good at using it for other people, I'd imagine.
It occurred to me too, as you were saying, that one of the things that actually my therapist has said is a phrase that I really like, and I think it also applies to relationships a lot, which is the use of old data. Basically, that many times, and who is this more true with than people who we've been around for decades, right? Is that we use old data to preemptively in our own head answer the question of what's about to happen, or what if I say this or try this, and we don't sometimes give a person a chance to give us some new data.
That's right. Makes sense? That's excellent. Yeah. I do internal family systems a lot, especially with individual work. And one of my favorite parts of that process is when you find a part that hasn't been updated, even with where you are in your life, right? And that you can say, no, that's an old story. We can release that now, and there's we can try something new. And I think that is so powerful to go through, process, and then release some of that old data.
Yeah. In fact, I think the one that aired just right before this was a friend of mine, another podcaster, who came on, and we both just talked about IFS as recipients of that. We
Yeah.
both had gone through that, and I remember the very first time someone said during the exercise where you're like talking to your emotional part and all this. It had me. They say, "I'll ask this part of you how old it thinks you are," and I was like, "Oh, that's kind of." And I've thought so much about that since then. Of like how many of our parts are just kind of like, "Oh, I'm over here. I'm stalled out. I'm focused on this one particular problem emotionally." Obsessing on it. And does that part of me even appreciate the fact that I'm an adult with lots of resources who can like try to
Yes.
do things?
Resources and successes, maybe even about this exact same issue. Yeah, it's fascinating.
And you're right, and I might be good to talk a little bit about this concept, which I know is big in family systems, which is the family story or the family mythology. I'm channeling, I think, Salvador Minuchin when I say that, of like, what's the mythology of a family? Well, the story of our family is this member of the family is a real jerk, and this one is like, helpless, and this one is, kind of stupid, and or whatever.
Right.
And we start to believe this mythology instead of challenging and saying like, well, wait, why do we think this person's not as capable as everyone else? Just because we thought it? Well, that's not a good reason to think something. Let's just
Right.
keep doing it because we used to do it. That's historically a bad reason to do things.
Right. And can I challenge my role and participate in this family in a different way? And what happens if I try?
Yeah. Yeah. How do you approach those kinds of things, and how big do you find roles, people getting stuck into roles, or challenging those roles? What are some things that you see there that you advise people to try to do with those things?
Almost always. So if we look at it through kind of a couples counseling lens, it's we come into partnerships with the baggage of our family of origin, marriages or partnerships, whatever we saw, plus our old relationships, plus the messages we've gotten from media and society about what relationships should look like and how a woman participates or a man participates. And then there's all this mixed messages depending where you are on the gender continuum. And so to really to notice what's happening, because so much of this is unconscious, and to decide, what I see a lot is that we are still stuck in pretty traditional gender roles in a lot of places. And even people who identify as very pro gender equality and really want to shake up the roles that they are playing in their families, there's still, there's so much research that supports that women still take on so much of the cognitive load of parenting and family life. And then, some men not really even seeing that that's an issue. And so what I feel like I'm always encouraging people to do is to just say it, right? Be direct, be concise, be efficient, but say it out loud. We have to put this stuff on the table in order to, the worst thing that happens is when these roles are unconscious. But we also have resentment building, which happens all the time, or just a niggling thing, feeling that things aren't right. And so what I'm always trying to encourage people to do is to get it out in the open, where then we can look at it and deal with it and be curious about what's happening.
Yeah. What do you think holds people back from that?
So interesting. So the book I'm writing right now is called Be Difficult. And I feel very strongly that often we are held back because we don't want to make other people uncomfortable or angry or have a hard conversation, when in fact, all we're doing is punting hard conversations to a later date when they will probably be much higher conflict, much more painful. So sometimes I'll suggest that, let's say somebody's mother-in-law keeps dropping by unannounced. And let's say the wife, who's the in-law, is furious about this. If you suggest something like, well, why don't you tell her that you need a text before she comes over? Why don't we say we're going to dinner on Sundays, but then that's it during the week? Then they don't want to say that because they don't want to come across as mean or cold or difficult, right? We don't want to come across as difficult. Whereas I think daring to be a little difficult and leaning into healthy conflict and healthy communication actually leads to emotional intimacy and to much fuller relationships. But I think we have this fantasy that if we say things perfectly, no one will ever be offended or upset with us. And that's just not what it's like to be in relationship, right? We're humans dealing with humans, and everyone has some kind of rough edges or tender parts. And it's just inevitable that there'll be some conflict to have to move through. So I try and help people get ahead of that a little bit by risking lower level conflict in order to reach deeper understanding.
It's very interesting to me the way that we do that, where in order to be nice, we don't mention things. And it's weird how it's motivated sometimes, I think, by fear, one way or the other. But a lot of times I think there's that intention to say, to save or improve the relationship by not offending or not causing trouble. And then it has the reverse effect, right?
100%. Also, if you're in relationship, right, normally, even if someone's feelings are hurt, they will appreciate getting past that. What I think ends up happening is resentment builds, and then you're so upset you just throw a hand grenade in the whole system and blow it up completely, where maybe that didn't need to happen.
Yeah, no, and how many times have people found themselves in this case where it's like, boy, there was another way to handle this, and it would have probably worked really well. So, but we still, stay away from it. Sometimes even after the fact. And I'll say this: if anybody out there is tempted to think I'm pointing fingers, I'll. You can't see me now. I'm pointing them right here. You're listening to the champ at this problem here of avoiding communication because I'm afraid it'll hurt someone's feelings, or because my role is, like you just said, my assumed role is to say, I just got to make sure everyone's okay all the time. That's one of my biggest sort of life issues, is to try to move past that. And yet it's a pervasive anxiety oftentimes that people run into.
Right. I'm 100%. I mean, especially if, I don't know anything about your family system, right? But if your idea was that your job was to make sure everyone is okay and kind of manage people's feelings and get out ahead of anything that might cause conflict, that's a full-time job, right? And that sticks with us. And then, and of course, if we are loving, compassionate people, we don't want other people to be upset, right? But it's unavoidable. So you want to do it in a constructive way.
And it's interesting how when you find out, it's just like this old data thing, when you will mention it or you bring it up and, as you put it, just say it. The interesting thing is that I find there's a certain amount of time where your partner will say, okay, cool. Or they'll say, I don't feel that way anymore. You don't feel that way anymore. I've been dictating some big choices in my life for 5 years or more based off of this. And it's like, based on the fact you said this, when did I say that? 15 years ago? I probably didn't mean it 6 months later. I mean, so, check in now and again.
I mean, that goes back to the 5-year, like blowing out the cobwebs on the relationship, right? Like, what beliefs are you operating with that your partner doesn't even hold anymore? Right? That's important information to have.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's good to check in, especially if it's coming up for you. And even if a spouse or partner says, no, I still feel that way. Okay, at least we're talking about it then. At least we know.
That's right. That's right.
What kinds of things do you see as useful resources for people? I'll say useful because, and we won't go through and trash talk any, probably, unless you want to. I don't care. You can do whatever you want. But here's the following. Here's the real dirt on John Gottman. No, I'm just kidding, everybody. I just mentioned Gottman because everybody likes Gottman, by the way. So don't at me, everyone. And if you're listening, John, please come on the show. No, but what kinds of resources? There's so many out there. How do we narrow down what works for us and find things? Do you have go-to books or things, or how do you tell people how to find things to help?
Sure. Again, this has been kind of the theme of this podcast is it's what resonates with you, right? Is what will resonate. So that as a caveat, I love Terry Real's work. I've studied with him and I use a lot of his concepts. And so he just had a new book come out, Us, that I haven't read yet, but I have it and it's on my nightstand. So that will be up soon. I have to say, if you go to a bookstore and you and your partner look around and pick something out that resonates with both of you and you read it together, I don't really see how you can go wrong, right? I mean, there's relationship experts that might resonate with me more than other people, but most of it, I can't think of anyone out there who's dangerous. I'm sure they exist, right?
Sure. Right.
But probably you'd have, and certainly if you're finding a therapist, it should be someone who you feel like you can have a growth-based, trusting, connecting experience with. And if you don't, you should get out of that office as quickly as you can. But in terms of resources, I think almost anything you do to invest in your coupledom, right? If you go to one of the Gottman weekend workshops or do one of Terry Real or Esther Perel's online classes, I just don't see a downside. I think it's only upside. And if both you and your partner resonate with one person, then that's amazing because most of these people have a lot of great work to delve into.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. That's a really good point. So once again, the kind of the teamwork aspect kind of even transcends the stuff you read, like the specifics a lot of times.
That's right. Yeah. 100%.
Excellent. Yeah, because it goes towards unified goals and things like that. What do you see as some of the biggest pitfalls? Maybe it's little things. I think we all know what the hand grenades are, right? If there's major things, and maybe even you can comment on some of those if you see any of those increasing in commonality or common occurrence or anything. But just what do you see as like little pitfalls or people fall into when they're not being careful?
Yeah. So two things. One, we've already touched on is not speaking up when things are bothering you and allowing resentment to accumulate. I often say that one partner is building a case against their partner, right? They're collecting all the information to show that their partner is all wrong and they're all right, which rarely stands up to the light of day, right? When everything finally comes out. So that's one thing, is to speak up earlier, right? We don't have to speak up about every little thing. And certainly in relationships, sometimes we just let things slide. But if the same type of thing is happening again and again, you have to talk about it. That's one. And the other thing that I see, and it's often on the other side of the person who's avoiding these hard conversations, is someone will say one partner brings a problem, like you work all weekend, every weekend, and I hate it. I wish you were spending more time with me and the kids, and you're not participating in our family in a way that feels comfortable for me. And the other partner says, okay, I'll do better, and maybe doesn't work the next weekend, but then seems like, well, my partner basically seems okay, and just kind of sliding back in. And then, the first partner will often just give up bringing it up. And I have to say, again, like the PSA about if one person wants to go to therapy, you should go to therapy. My second one is if your partner has been complaining about the same thing and then suddenly stops complaining, it isn't because it doesn't bother them anymore. It's because now they're trying to figure it out without you. Like now they don't think you can collaborate with them around this issue. So it's not good, right? It's a bad sign. So I think it's both not taking our partner's objections or feelings or wishes seriously on one side, and the other side is not bringing up what's happening for us.
Absolutely. It's interesting when you put it that way, because if we're making decisions about a 2-person agreement / partnership, whatever, by ourselves, yeah, that's a lot more risky to the relationship because of what type of decisions we might make.
100%. And that's when I have a couple come in and they'll say, and oftentimes this is, I think women initiate like 70% of divorces. So oftentimes it's, she's done. And he's pretty shocked, hadn't anticipated that at all. And so no one wants to be on that sofa in that therapist's office. That is a very bad place to be.
Yeah. Gotcha. How often do you see that, somebody having a shocked response that they've been asked to come into therapy, or that they're having as many problems as their spouse is having?
Pretty often, actually. That's why I started writing my book, is because I felt like, what is happening here? That they come in, and again, this isn't always the case. Often the genders are reversed on this, or it's a same gender couple. But very often it will be a woman who has been asking for therapy and asking for change for a long time. And then the man just won't, it's like he hasn't gotten his head around how big of a deal that this has been for her. And so then they're coming into therapy, and she sits down and says, you know what, I'm actually done. I just want to figure out how to, extricate ourselves from this relationship with minimal damage. And he is like, what, didn't really thought they were just going to be at the very beginning of a process and hopefully make things better. And so I think that that's a failure, a totally understandable breakdown on both sides, like that she maybe should have been more forceful earlier, and that he should have been more attentive earlier, and that things could have been much different, because that's a sad thing when there's a lot of love there and it feels kind of too late, like too much has gone on to make a meaningful repair.
Yeah. What about opposites? We've talked about being proactive, like there's the every 5 years thing. There's what kinds of things, other things do you see as helpful for people to keep it finely tuned?
Having fun together. There's, I wish I could cite this off the top of my head, and I won't be able to, but there was some research that showed that having kind of a terrifying experience together actually really helped. Really? And there was this incredible story about this woman's marriage being rekindled after her husband, who was a scientist, accidentally set himself on fire, and she put him out.
Oh, wow.
And they had another 10 years of wonderful marriage. So I don't think you should set anyone on fire, but doing kind of novel, interesting, exciting things together, right? Trying not to fall into a routine. What would it look like to go salsa dancing? What would it look like to go parachuting, right? Or travel somewhere? And obviously everyone is going to have a different tolerance for risk. But that, I think, just keeping things new. I also think having shared friends is useful, because it's kind of fun to see your partner as other people look at them, right? And there's, especially if someone is very funny with other people, I think we get used to looking at our partner through one set of eyes, and it can be refreshing to see them through another set of eyes, or see them if they're, in like a different workspace, or seeing them afresh, I think is healthy. So I would say, yeah, communication, time together, novelty, doing something different, and seeing our partners through fresh eyes.
What are some things that led you to write your book? And this is probably a good time to tell everybody a little bit about what it is and what the theme of it is.
Yeah,
I know relationships, but obviously more specific
relationships. Yeah, well, the book is Be Difficult, and it is. I hope that both genders will get a lot out of it, and but it is written primarily towards women, because I have found that in my work that there's a lot of women who have a lot of resentment that they're holding on to, that I think could be dispelled in ways that would be healthier for them and healthier for their relationships. So it was a couple of things. One was that phenomenon I told you about, having couples show up when she is done and he is shocked. And that I've actually never had the reverse happen, where he was done and she was shocked. I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but just in my particular practice, I haven't seen that. And then the phenomenon of women having issues in their relationships, not just with partners, but with bosses or mothers or friends, where they are very, very upset, but won't speak up for fear of looking difficult or upsetting someone, even when it wasn't in the best interest of the relationship at all, right? Like that things were actually going to be much, much worse if they didn't speak up. And my offering, well, what would happen if you said, and then something very like, I don't like that, or that's upsetting me, or I would like to do something different. And really that seeming like a very risky thing to say, right? Whereas as we say it right here, to say, if I were to say, Dwight, after you asked me that question about relationships in my book, I just feel really uneasy about that. And I want to talk about that further. Like that shouldn't be a very shocking thing to say, and presumably you would have been like, whoa, okay, let's talk about it.
Right.
And just really encouraging people to say these kind of very straightforward, very basic, sharing their experience on the pathway towards greater intimacy, and being open to other people sharing their experience, right? It goes two ways. Definitely.
It's interesting though when you say that, because like the two ways, you see there's a trust factor. Often we think of trust as just, is the person going to do what they say they'll do? Are they going to be faithful? Are they going to tell me the truth? And then there's the other side of that trust of, do I trust them to receive? If I do say that, do I trust them to receive, or to get angry and say, well, Jerry, you wanted to come on the show and talk about you. I gave you a chance to talk about,
yeah.
This is a very rich fiction we're making of when we paused the show and had this big conversation. No, but isn't it interesting, though, that when we actually, I will say a lot of the time, maybe even most, if there's not like assuming there's not, I guess, a real toxic pattern or whatever, most of the time that we share that with people, they go, oh, really? Oh, okay. What do you mean? Tell me more. Let's talk about it. Even if they don't.
That's right.
And it's funny, I often tell people that you can assume two things. Most people, number one, will appreciate that you were honest with them. Mm-hmm. Also, many, if not most people, number two, might not express that within that conversation. It might be later.
Yeah.
They're not always going to say, thank you for pointing out my failings or the thing that you didn't like.
It might be several conversations, and that's completely appropriate, right? I mean, it's like we can give people time to process and then come back to something important. And to the point about people, whether they're open to it or not, I think so much, and I'm sure you find this as well with couples, a lot of the work is kind of coaching, right? It's like, how can I say this in a way that's clear, kind, concise? And how can I receive this in a way that is curious and open, as opposed to defensive or angry, which again, these are old stories, right? If you grew up in a system or had previous relationships where you felt like someone was just coming at you all the time and you had to protect yourself, you're probably going to be defensive, right? But that's something we can work on. And we can allow the defensiveness to kind of wash over us, take a beat, and then respond in a way that's more thoughtful.
Yeah. Or even if the current relationship has that, is what you're saying. Right. It sounds like you can even work that out to where, because then, that gives the other person something to work on too, instead of just, hey, share more. It's like, okay, how do you want to receive it? And what's going to help with that? And then you both work together. Right.
That's right.
Of like, I'm working on my stability of reaction, or working on a reaction that's more likely to encourage my partner to share. And,
That's right.
Yeah.
And because you're trying to, right, all communication always goes in cycles, right? And every couple has, probably a suboptimal cycle of conversations, at least around certain things. And can we break that and create a cycle that works better for both partners?
Yeah. Do you find, and it sounds like a lot of your book is oriented, as you put it, towards a large, not exclusively, but largely towards women in a heterosexual relationship with that dynamic? It sounds like, anyway. I don't mean to extrapolate.
Yeah, it is. Although the truth is, it's I think women, even in same-sex relationships, there is a tendency to be viewed as like kind of the protector of everyone's feelings, right? And I use the term in my book, like you're the shock absorber, right? So you make sure that everyone else in the system is taken care of and comfortable, even if it means you are having to take all of the weight and pressure and kind of slings and arrows in order to make sure that everyone else is comfortable. So even in, if it's, let's say, two women in a relationship, I oftentimes one person is still operating as the shock absorber. So, and I definitely don't mean to say that all women have trouble with speaking up or being the shock absorber. Not at all. But I think there are these kind of remnants of gender expectations that even women who otherwise are, it's not like 1950s housewives I'm talking about women who are, working or not working, but consider themselves equal partners in every way, and yet still fall into this shock absorber role. And it just makes them dissatisfied in their relationships. And a lot of them have a lot of depression or anxiety that I think stems from not being honest about what's going on for them. And that if we can get to the honesty piece and we can get to the speaking up piece, that a lot of other things start to fall into place in their lives.
Oh, I'm with you. I think that part of being a progressive person is trying to deal with what is, and particularly a progressive therapist, right? And so if it's like, oh, there's these elements that we kind of wish weren't there, or as you put it earlier, I think some people don't even like to bring it in and talk about it to where it's like, oh, this seems so cliche, and this seems so, well, it's cliche for a reason. If society is going to reinforce certain stereotypes, then we have to have a way to combat them too. So
that's right. And I love the way you put that of like, we are here to deal with what is, not what used to be, not what we wish were true, not what other people think is going on with us, like what is.
Yeah. Have you seen the field adjust over time as more couples, either same-sex couples or people who have come out maybe as trans, or just other issues of LGBTQ community stuff comes into relationship counseling? I'm just curious if you've seen the way that maybe therapists approach it change at all, or just the research or chatter in the community.
Yeah. I don't know if you've read Eve Rodsky's book, Fair Play, and it talks a lot about gender division of labor. She's great. She has a great documentary out too that I recommend to everybody. But, what the research shows is that actually same-sex couples have this figured out much, much better than heterosexual.
Isn't that interesting?
Couples.
That's interesting that it's research-based, because I've noticed the same thing when I've worked with couples, queer couples who have come in to see me, that it's like, wow, there are certain things that they seem to do better.
Because
right out of the gate.
It's not the old tropes, right? They're not confined by ideas of what, in the same way of what is supposed to be, right? So they I think, have taken rightful advantage of the fact that we can start fresh. This, our parents, it was a different time. They weren't afforded some of the opportunities we are in terms of building families and whatnot. And so we get to start from scratch and make sure it works for both of us, right? And I think straight couples can take a lot from that, right? Your marriage can be anything, or partnership can be anything you want it to be, right? You can start fresh. And with a lot of communication and hard work and flexibility, we can make a whole new marriage. Anyone can do that, and I think that gay couples are ahead of straight couples for sure on that.
Well, and there's certain, communication walls. I find that, and I don't know if this correlates 100% to how traditional your situation is. Does it go up or whatever? But the level of assumptions we have about, well, this is just the way families roll. This is the way that couples roll. This is what I saw my parents do. And the more we kind of look like them in my head, the more we look like all these other couples and families, the better. And that's, and that's just assumed. And at the same time, there's such a variety in how people live, to where it's like you come into a relationship and it's like, well, I just assumed you were going to mow the lawn because you're the husband or the wife, either one, and it's like, I just assumed you were going to trim the topiaries outside in our hedge maze or whatever.
Isn't that your job? Yeah.
I don't know the clientele everybody works with, but hedge maze is usually hedge maze based conflicts are a big part of what you deal with.
I'm in New York City, so there's zero conflict over the hedge maze. Other things, yeah.
Oh, you work right in New York City? That's cool.
Yeah, I'm in Brooklyn. Mm-hmm.
At least, those who don't always think it's cool. I'm sure there's pros and cons.
You're right. Right. Well, I would love a hedge maze actually, but there's other cool things about it.
I'm going to see, this is the next book. We need to,
Yeah,
in fact, I need to edit this out because someone's going to steal our idea of hedge maze therapy. At least that's a way to get a hedge maze as a business expense.
I like it.
I wanted to ask you, and this is maybe a little inside baseball, but as a therapist, one of the things they talk about with couples work is maintaining balance in the session so that nobody feels either beat up or that you're taking someone's side or, or that kind of thing. At least it has to be dealt with, those issues. And I think that's also a hesitation clients have coming into therapy. And it's like,
Right.
you're going to like them better than me, or especially if they're the one who, like, say, threw the hand grenade, so to speak, if they're the one who blew up the world, they're like,
That's
well,
right.
I'm going to be the villain, clearly. Anyway, so, I mean, what do you think about that, or what do you have to say about that kind of maintaining balance doing therapy with two people?
I have a lot of empathy for everybody who comes in the door, right? And the unconditional positive regard, the Rogerian therapy. I'm all for that. And I really feel that way. I mean, people walk in the door and I'm looking at them with soft eyes. I'm looking for the strengths while looking at what is. So I actually tell people right away, it's not going to feel perfectly even, that there might be sessions that feel all about what your partner is going through. And over time, I think that will balance out, but I'm not looking session by session for it to balance out. And the other thing I always like to say is, every couple comes in and we can look at the problems like a pyramid, right? And we have to start at the bottom with kind of whatever the biggest issue is. And then we can work our way up. So for example, if there's been, I'm just using this because it popped in my head, but like financial infidelity, let's say that's bottom. We're going to spend a lot of time on that in terms of rebuilding trust and new systems and how we're going to talk about money going forward and how much transparency there's going to be and what the partner who felt wronged needs, right? To feel like that they can trust again. Then we'll get to maybe how critical that partner was in the beginning. And then the first partner felt like they couldn't share any of their money problems or whatever. We're going to get there. You have to this is why it's so important that you like your therapist, because you have to trust them, right? That they're going to get there eventually. And that, I am holding it all kind of on the dashboard of my mind, but that things are going to have to go in order. And we're going to have to deal with the crisis first, if there is a crisis. And then we can go into some of the unhealthy patterns that are more longstanding that maybe led to the crisis.
Absolutely.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because essentially one of the first things you're doing is admitting that there is a balance issue, sort of, by saying it and then just calling it out, which actually, funny enough, probably for a reason, because you're, a smart, consistent person, goes along with your message, actually, when you're saying, and it's one of the things I really like about your title of your book too, is saying like, oh, let's be difficult. It's kind of difficult to do couples counseling. You're going to feel like I'm beating up on you sometimes. And hey, you know what? That's how it is. But I'll always be fair and I'll never judge you, or whatever it is. Just calling it out and saying, like you said, yeah, there's a big bonfire here. We got to kind of attend to that before we go and pay attention to how many lit cigarettes someone's flicking off into the dry underbrush. They're both important.
That's right.
Right. But one certainly takes a lot more attention than the other at first, to get it under control. I think that metaphor worked. Yeah.
I do too. I like it.
Well, this is it's been wonderful to be able to talk to you and just kind of absorb these things and learn from you. And I think it's really helpful for people out there. We're going to talk a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about your book and where people are going to find that and where they find your writings and stuff. First off, though, I always ask people at the end if there is a nonprofit or a charity that is like either close to their mind or, just dear to them. It absolutely might be about what we're talking about, but it certainly doesn't have to be. It could be anything at all. It could be about, lost dogs or something. Do you have anything that comes to mind that you would advise people to get to know out there, a cause or a organization?
There's a charity called Women and Children that, it helps homeless mothers and their children, and supports a lot of the work around logistics around childcare and getting your kid to school, and deals with absenteeism with children in school, and just is very realistic about, if you don't have a home, how much harder it is to set your kids up in a way that helps them lay the foundation of a good future. So I love that one. That's one I've been involved with right now. So wonderful. That just leaps off the top of my head. Yeah.
What's the name of that again?
It's WAC, Women and Children.
WAC. The Broken Brain. Hey, everybody. Dwight here with a quick Broken Brain correction. That's right. A BBC. I think the first one to use those letters. Hey, Tonya emailed me after the recording of this conversation to point out that she had used the name Women and Children for the charity that she mentioned. And it's actually Women in Need. So that is the charity that she is sharing today is called Women in Need. The description of what they do is still very pertinent. So there you go. Make sure to check that out and see how you can get involved. It's a great organization for, of course, a great cause. And now, back to our regularly scheduled program. That's also, by the way, here's really inside baseball, a little part the curtain here. That's one of the reasons why I vamp a little when I ask the question. I'm always like, it's anyway, any kind of organization. I have like a 30-second question because I try to give people a little time to think. There you go. So I'm a little nicer than people think.
I click through their internal Rolodex. Yeah.
Is your book anywhere where is it up for like pre-order or anything yet, or is it currently?
No, it's not. It's still in process. So right now, I have a blog on Psychology Today that I would love people to check out.
Yeah.
And I'm also posting a lot about relationships on my Instagram post, which is Tonya Lester Psychotherapy. Okay. So if people wanted to check that out, I would love to see them there. And I'm always curious as to what people would like to hear more about. So I'm definitely open to suggestions.
So if everybody wants a chance to get their info sneaking into the book, maybe, or at least in the blog, right?
They can, go to Instagram. This is your chance. That's right.
Well, I'll put this out there too. We like to do, I like to do a little periodic book club here on the show. And when your book comes out, definitely hit me up. We should do an episode reminding people it's coming out. And, maybe that'd be something that would fit nicely into the book club too. So we'll keep that.
I love that. Thank you. That's wonderful.
And where do people find your blog then for Psychology Today?
So it's just, Psychology Today, Tonya Lester. And then it's also on my website, which is tonyalester.com. So I always post things both places.
So that's kind of a good landing space for everybody is tonyalester.com. Okay.
That's right. Excellent. That's perfect. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, once again, thank you so much for being here. And everybody out there, too, thank you for listening and being part of the show. Make sure that you check out as well. Our Patreon has some new changes and things coming up at patreon.com/brokenbrain. And there's some little prizes as well as some just normal benefits that you get by being a patron of the show. You can also go to buymeacoffee.com/brokenbrain if you want to just do a one-time contribution, help keep the lights on as well. Love you all out there. Thank you for listening. And once again, Tonya, thank you for being here to make this such a good conversation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Court and Parts Podcast Network. To listen to more Court and Parts shows, visit courtandarts.com.